Get Certified Together program is created by Technocofe, your free online knowledge sharing website based out in London.
That particular international law, or they might give their own suggestion, they might try to tweak it, which is really a challenge. A good common international law is a potential solution, but of course it's not really possible. Some countries try it. For example, EU as a whole have covered a lot of laws which are covering so many countries in European Union. They might have a good agreement with UK and US based organizations as well, but what about Asian countries, or what about people with Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Get Certified Together series. This is episode number 46, and from this episode onwards, we are diving into domain 6, which is the last domain of CCSP syllabus. Now, if you are thinking that because this is last syllabus, then it will be having maybe some easier topics, or maybe something which is kind of like a wrap-up session for all of the rest domains. It's not exactly like that. At least I didn't feel like this when I was going through the topics of this domain, and I really felt that this is something which will be a bit harder for me, to be honest, personally, because I am more into technical side of things. I deliver a lot of projects hands-on. Now, this particular domain have information around various kind of guidelines, what are different type of standards, what kind of law and regulations being created all over the world, and what kind of standards you have to use as an organization. It have those actual terminologies around that as well. And it's a gray area. Means if you are into a technical side of things, you know that either some solution will work or it will not work. When we are going into this direction where we have more topics around documentation, around the guidelines, around the standards and recommendations, everyone might have their own viewpoint, and it's quite tough to justify why you are thinking in a particular way, or if you are, for example, giving some recommendation to an organization, or if you are trying to follow a particular framework in your organization, maybe that framework will not fit all the use cases which your organization is into, and it might even break few things which are existing and which are running as it is without those standards or those frameworks. So it's a gray area. If you come from a viewpoint of someone who is only from the security side of things, they will of course want all the recommendations, all the standards and framework to be followed. But if you are working towards more on technical side of things, or if you are more into people who are really delivering the stuff day to day, you might be a bit hesitant to follow those standards or guidelines right away, because you might think that this will break, or this is not even possible. Means we are really talking about implementing those standards onto a cloud-based infrastructure, where anyhow we have people who are still not able to understand what really is cloud, and then you are on top of that asking them to follow a particular guidelines which even you are unsure that how they will really fit into the cloud-based infrastructure. And that's how this whole domain starts. So it talks about the real challenges which we have when we are talking more in terms of cloud-based deployments. So like I said, this domain 6 is more on the theoretical side of things, and some of the topics are really longer than usual. So I really am gonna find this domain bit boring and bit longer as well, and bit tougher for me as well, because what I will be doing is I will be going into an unknown territory where even I myself is not aware of what kind of topics might be coming in this whole domain. So like I said, it is more challenging, but of course with more challenge comes more excitement, and that's how it is. Means we have to, anyhow, we cannot skip this topic. It's not like those exams where you can skip one or two topics and you can really get away with it. This is a whole domain which is covering all those topics and all those theoretical information. We have to read it through and we have to learn about that. In last episode, I shared that we are planning a conference. We are kind of like an online conference where we'll be having someone from industry who will be sharing information around the concept of security. Of course, that's not something which I am doing myself. So this is by ISC Square Thames Valley chapter, which I am one of the volunteers. So that event is actually scheduled and it is happening on on 25th April. I will put the link in my this show notes and description, so you can actually register for that event. This will be of course based on GMT 0, so it will be in London times, and if you are either in United States or UK, then of course you will find it much easier to join compared to other time zones of the world. It is a free event, so anyone can join. You don't need to be an ISC Square member to present yourself, and it will be online event as well. You of course are welcome to join it. Maybe you can see my face somewhere in the crowd as well, because I of course will be going physically into the location, but like I said, it's an online event and it will be happening on Teams, I guess. Topic which will be covered in that event is around Docker container security and how we can leverage Docker as a tool to implement our security solutions. So Docker itself, it's a big term now. I was reading somewhere that EC2 instances or virtual machine in itself is now somehow treated as a legacy solution, which is a bit scary. I myself started working on virtual machines just 6 or 7 years back, and within just a time frame of 5 to 6 years, it is that particular technology is treated as an old school. When I started learning about cloud, I thought that this is it. This is something which I'll be able to carry on for my at least 15 to 20 years, and I am safe in my job. But of course, with all those Gen AI and artificial intelligence coming in everywhere, even that cloud infrastructure management job and deployments around EC2 instances or deployment around those monolith heavy application is going out of the window, and containers are a big thing now. I have a good hands-on knowledge on container side as well, so this is something which I'm not really scared of. But of course, if you are more into cloud deployment side and you are more into managing cloud infra side, then it's high time that you move from managing those cloud infrastructure to more containerized solution as well. At least you should know how containers work, how they're designed, what kind of security risks are associated with them, how their networking really looks like, because networking is one bit which we tend to miss out when we are discussing about cloud and all those fancy new terms. Networking is still there. Never ever forget your networking concept. If you are new into this domain, if you are new into cloud field, even if you are new into security, networking is one thing which is kind of like baseline. You should know how networking works. Even if just have an idea of how subnetting works, what is difference between a routing, route table, bridging, how you can actually send traffic from point A to point B. It's not about really going into those deep information like how encapsulation works and what are different packets which are flowing from point A to point B, but at least from an overall point of view, you should know basics of networking. Now, of course, networking around Docker containers and Kubernetes is a bit complicated. It have an additional layer of deployments which is required if you want to run containerized system on your host. So networking is one thing. There are a lot of concepts around Docker and around Kubernetes. If I start talking about them, then of course our episode 46 will be finished without discussing anything about security and domain 6. So now I think it's the point of episode where we can actually dive into today's actual topic, which is domain 6. So domain 6 is legal risk and compliance, and this is what we will be covering in today's episode. Before starting today's episode, let's have a quick short break, and then I'll be joining you guys after that break. Alright, welcome back. Let's start today's topic, and like I mentioned, it will be domain 6, which is covering topics around legal risk and compliance. Now, before starting into that, what we are trying to cover here is cloud-based infrastructure. From domain 1 now till domain 6. I think it's the same story everywhere. In each domain, we first try to understand how things are different in the cloud, whether from the security concepts, whether from the operational challenges, whether from the data security perspective. Everything changes when you talk about cloud-based infrastructure, and when you have deployed your infrastructure, your applications, your system, your databases onto the cloud. It doesn't matter what kind of hosting service you're using, whether you're using infrastructure as a service or a SaaS-based offering. Challenges are different in cloud, and same goes for domain 6 as well. We have to first understand what are different challenges or what are different compliance-related risks associated with cloud-based infrastructure. Now, first and foremost, we can agree that regulations and laws are really complex. Now, if you are into security side of things and if you are already aware of these topics, then you can fully agree with what I said. If you are new to security like me, then yes, it is really complex, and that's the only time whenever I am in conversation with someone who is already into security or even who is not in the security side of things. Moment we start discussing about compliance and legal risks, I tend to stop myself, because this is something which is I'm not good at because I don't have kind of knowledge in that field. And that's what we are doing today in this episode from now on. So, yeah, it is complicated and it is complex. When we're talking about cloud, this complexity increases. How it really increases though? Well, one of the starting point is the benefit which cloud gives. It provides a broad network access. If you recall from our domain 1, 5 characteristics of the cloud computing, first one was broad network access. That means you can access your workloads from anywhere. Now, from the legal perspective, this is a nightmare. Your application is deployed on a cloud-based infrastructure, which is running on a region which is, I don't know, in AWS US East, while your team is sitting in EU or your team is sitting in India, and you are accessing the workloads which are deployed on US or Africa or Australian region. There are so many regions and locations around the cloud, especially in public cloud. You can understand the complexity it creates when you're talking about legal terms, because now your workload, now your information is spread across everywhere, and no one knows where it's stored, and no one knows who is accessing that information when you are not logging into that. So, of course, data hosted in different cloud DC locations across worldwide. This really limits the organizations who are into law side of things, who are looking into legal matters, because they cannot access which data is covered and which data is placed in which different location. Now, of course, from cloud perspective, you can know that this is something is in UK South location of Azure, or this is something in EU West or US East of AWS, but no one is going to give you access of that data center. AWS or Azure won't allow you to go inside their data center. So complexity is still there. Of course, solution is you should have a well-defined international law which covers all the data which is spread everywhere, all the workloads, all the applications covered anywhere across the globe. Now, if you are really into tiny bit of politics, you can understand that this is not really possible. You cannot create a common international law. Even though if you create it, you may find some of the countries which might not like that solution because they won't be allowing it to follow that particular international law, or they might give their own suggestion. They might try to tweak it, which is really a challenge. A good common international law is a potential solution, but of course, it's not really possible. Some countries try it. For example, EU as a whole have covered a lot of laws which are covering so many countries in European Union. They might have a good agreement with UK and US based organizations as well. But what about Asian countries, or what about people in Africa or those companies in Latin America? Are they going to follow the same standards? May or may not. Like I said, you might be in tiny bit of politics. I'm not really a political guy, so they can follow, to be honest. This of course will improve the collaboration, but who cares about collaboration these days? But of course, if you don't have an international law and still you have cloud-based infrastructure, you have applications which are running onto the cloud. So it doesn't mean that you are on your own. We still have some good legal frameworks which are defined for cloud-based infrastructure. Let's cover some of them. First and foremost is ISO 27002 and ISO 27017. Now 27017 is just an extension of 27002, and it covers relevant and additional implementation guidelines related to cloud-based infrastructure. So what kind of controls you can put for a particular cloud service is what if, for example, you are using infrastructure as service, what kind of controls you should be having, what kind of IAM relevant guidelines you should be following in your organization, how you should be storing your data, what kind of encryption method you should be having, who and who not can access that information or access that database. Not only that, it also covers information like how you're designing your solution. So it should be in high availability, it should be always placed in a particular manner that your system is always up and running, what kind of backup services you are having, because this is important in terms of business continuity and disaster recovery, which, as you know, that this is one of the big topic which we followed in one of the domain. So this standard cover guidelines around all those cloud-based deployments, and of course it's one of the go-to standard whenever someone is talking about implementing cloud-based infrastructure into their organization, or they want to transform their existing infra and making it kind of like a hybrid solution, or maybe a fully public cloud solution. So any kind of design you have in your mind, it's good to follow these standards at the creating kind of like baseline configuration for your organization. Another important regulation is GDPR. Now GDPR is a regulation. After some time I will also cover difference between law and regulation and standard. So ISO was standard, GDPR is a regulation. GDPR is General Data Protection Regulation, which actually covers the data privacy, especially for residents of EU. So if you are resident of EU and if some organization is storing your information, they have to follow this regulation, they have to follow these guidelines. They cannot use your data right away. They have to make sure that they are following GDPR properly. Now this is even applicable if there is an organization which is based out in some other country which is not part of EU, but still they are storing the data which is of a EU person, of a EU citizen. Then that organization which is even not part of European Union, they are still liable to implement GDPR. They have to be compliant with that. Let me cover some of the topics which are covered in that regulation of GDPR. It's quite interesting, So one of them is data can only be stored after consent. So you cannot simply take someone's data if someone is registering on some online portal with their email ID, their name and their date of birth. That doesn't mean that that data will be stored in that online portal's database right away. There will be a proper consent pop up there, and if you deny them for that consent, then they cannot store your information on their database. So that's a good thing. And if you somehow feel that your data is being taken, you gave the consent first, but later you realize that you really don't want them to use their data, you can simply ask them to eradicate that data, and they have to remove it from anywhere, any database they have stored your information. So you have right to deletion as well. You can ask any organization to delete your data. And not only that, if an organization or if a company fail to comply with it, you can take them into the court. So this is a proper regulation. This is a law situation where you are getting a right as a person whose data or whose information is used by an organization to just simply control that. So this law actually gave you right and gave you a strong power as a citizen that you have rights to choose who and who cannot use your data. And if you don't want, then they have to comply with it. Now, enough with EU. Let's move on to Asia now. Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation. Now, this is simply for regulation of free flow of information between those Asian countries. So we have, if you are from that part of globe, you already know that Asia have a lot of countries which are really diverse and which have people from different ethnicity, different countries. They have their attached joint border, and there are a lot of cooperation among those. They want to regulate what kind of information is flowing from in and out between that group of countries. So this Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation covers that. Now let's move across Atlantic and discuss about HIPAA. Now HIPAA is US based regulatory which covers your health data records. So if your hospital or if your insurance provider is keeping your health records, they have to be HIPAA compliant. So they have to follow certain regulations as part of US government advisory. And if they don't follow it, then of course, like it happened anywhere, you can simply sue them, you can file a case against them, and they have to follow that. Now, I have taken my privilege of podcaster host to use term law and regulation and standard sometime interchangeably, but they are not. They have a specific definition and you cannot simply use them whenever you want and whatever fits your description or whatever fits your story. Law and regulations are the rules created and governed by local government, and they are admissible in the court. So they are written rules. They have to be followed, and if they are not followed as it is as per the line to line written in the description, you can simply file a case and organization or company will be liable to get back to you or even pay for the damages. HIPAA and GDPR, they are laws. Now, regulations are the instructions which are carried by regulatory bodies as part of implementation of law. So law will define that these are the regulations which any organization have to follow, and the bodies which are responsible for implementing those regulations will follow all those instructions as it is. Standards are not like that. Standards are simply guidelines, and it's upon you which particular component or which particular part of that standard you want to use for your organization and throw away the other one. Or even you can customize a bit. So I cannot say that ISO 27002. So I cannot say that as an organization, I am ISO 27002 compliant, because that's not a compliance measure. That's just a standard which I am following as an organization. Of course, I can brag about that I am following a certain guidelines, but that doesn't mean that I am above the law and I can do anything with that, because those are just standards and those are just recommendations which you may or may not follow. It's completely upon you. PCI DSS, ISO 27000, NIST, they are just all example of standards. Now for cloud-based system, Generally, these days, individual laws specify ownership of CSP, customer, and partners because of shared responsibility model. So each stakeholder of the cloud-based infrastructure is liable to follow a certain kind of law and regulations, which they are actually required to do. So for example, me as a CSP, I am giving someone rights to create EC2 instances or virtual machines on top of my cloud infra. Doesn't mean that I have to make sure that the infrastructure which is deployed on the cloud, those virtual machines will be HIPAA compliant. That's not my job, because that is the job of whoever is using that machines to store the health records. So there is of course a certain definition, or there is certain boundaries between different stakeholders, and based on the stakeholder responsibilities, of course you are liable to follow certain regulations and you're not liable to follow certain others. Now let's discuss about e-discovery, which happens to be the last topic of today's episode. E-discovery is process of seeking electronic data for intent of using it in digital forensics, maybe a civil or criminal case. Now, digital forensics we have covered extensively in cloud security operations, so you can check out that episode. Digital forensics is nothing but keeping hold of your information after any incident, and of course present them in front of a court of justice or any law and order regulatory body. So that's the whole idea of digital forensics. E-discovery is specifically around seeking that electronic information. Now, like everything, e-discovery and digital forensics are again a bit complicated in terms of public cloud specifically, because of course your data is stored in n number of locations, and there might be some users who have read-only access to one of the database or one of the data which is stored on a particular location. There might be some users who might be having administrator right. So it's again like all of the other stuff is hell lot of nightmare. Now we have a solution as well. ISO 27050 is a standard which specifically take care of e-discovery and forensics on the cloud. Now, as an end user, you might think that this is your responsibility, because you have to make sure that when you are seeking an information, or when you are after a particular incident, you are trying to fetch all the logs, all the events which happened during that time onto your cloud infra. It might be quite overwhelming, specifically if you are using infrastructure as a service, because in infra as a service, you are responsible for almost everything which is deployed onto the cloud. Each cloud provider have their own SaaS offerings, so you can find some SaaS solutions which actually provide these e-discovery related tools which you can use. You can buy from those CSPs and you can use those tools to start them up and feed in all the information around your estate, and they will be seeking all the information for you. Even the smarter solution might even detect your existing infra based on the account ID which you will provide. So for example, if you are familiar with AWS, then whenever you create a new account, you will be associated with a unique account ID, and within that account ID, whatever you are creating as part of your estate, those information will be tagged to that account ID by default. That's of course for billing purpose. Now those cloud provided SaaS solutions or even a third party solution can actually use your unique account ID, and based on that can detect all the infra which you have deployed onto the cloud by itself, and whatever happened during a particular day or particular time period, you can fetch the information, you can have everything. It's upon you once you have that information how you want to use it. You want to store it into a third location, or you want to use existing storage provided by the cloud service provider. It's completely upon you, but yeah, that's one of the mechanism. Now this particular domain doesn't really cover the technical aspects of the thing. So for e-discovery, I don't think there's any point of going into more detail, but that's the concept. And there is a solution, of course, like I told you, that every CSP have their own solution to help you out in e-discovery. Alright, that's it for today's episode. So in today's episode, we have covered topic first of domain 6, which is articulating legal requirements and unique risks within the cloud environment. In next week episode, we will be covering understanding privacy issues. So we will be discussing concepts around different kind of PII or personal data, how because of jurisdiction differences we might have challenges related to data privacy. So all those concepts will be covered in the next episode. Now I have a planned holidays around Easter, so I will be away from my system for a time. I will be trying to at least record something for the next episode as well, and during my holiday period maybe I'll take out some time to edit that out and send to you guys. But if there is no episode coming up after 46 for some period of time, then don't worry, I'm still alive and I will be recording that soon and will be publishing it soon as well. That's it for today's episode, and like I promised you, I will be putting the link for that event which will be happening on April and around Docker security. It will be nice for some of you guys to join there, so at least I myself can also feel that some of my listeners are there. And yeah, so that's it. Goodbye and good luck.
Thank you for listening to Get Certified Together. If you loved our content, then please like and subscribe from your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss the notification for our next episodes and announcements.